Welcome to the Law Society Gazette podcast, unpacking what matters most across the legal profession.
Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Law Society Gazette podcast. The Gazette is the journal of record for solicitors in England and Wales, and this podcast is our exciting new way to bring you industry news and analysis. I'm Paul Rogerson, Editor-in-Chief, and we're very pleased to have you here. We'll kick off today by examining a question that goes to the very credibility of the profession itself. Sarah Rapson is now 6 months and more into her tenure as Chief Executive of the Solicitors Regulation Authority. So she came in with a turnaround plan. Is the SRA beginning to rebuild trust, or is it simply managing decline more effectively? Rapson took over an organisation that had been widely criticised for delay, inconsistency, and for being detached from the profession it regulates. Her early months have been shaped by the aftershocks of notorious law firm failures, mounting operational pressures, and scrutiny from right across the profession. She promised sharper performance, clearer priorities, and a reset, her word, in relations with solicitors. So, 6 months on, to what extent has that pledge translated into tangible change so far? Joining me today are Deputy News Editor John Hyde.
Hello.
And reporter Moni Fouzder.
Hello.
John, Moni, welcome. So let's set the scene then. How broken do you think the SRA was when Sarah Rapson walked in the door last November? John?
I think about as broken as it's possible for a regulator to be, really. There wasn't a single element of it that seemed to be functioning as it should have been. There was very little trust from the public. The public had been let down, particularly with cases such as Axiom Ints and PM law and SSB law. The public wasn't being protected. Client money had gone missing by the millions. And then the profession had lost trust and faith in the regulator as well. There had been 2 devastating reports about the SRA's performance and competence from the Legal Services Board, and it just felt like the entire organisation had sort of lost its way. Its priorities were warped. Its resources were stretched, but the spending was in the wrong areas, and I think there was just a fundamental breakdown in relations between the public, the profession, and the regulator. So all in all, not a great scorecard.
No, not at all. To be scrupulously fair to Sarah Rapson, PM law did actually occur during her tenure, but obviously in the early weeks. Therefore, it's I don't think she can really be held culpable for that. Moni, what's your perception covering the SRA, the solicitors you talk to?
So I talked to a lot of legal aid solicitors. The SRA doesn't normally come up in conversation when talking about access to justice and legal aid related issues. The only time the SRA tends to come up is one of the areas I cover is the SQE. And the issues that I hear in relation to that have been pretty much the same. You hear the same concerns, the mental toll that the exam's taken, whether it's actually opened up diversity, the cost of sitting SQE. And the SRA publish a lot of reports where there's, for instance, ethnicity attainment gaps. They've, commissioned research into looking into that. But the answers kind of come back kind of broadly, well, the exam's fine. We've checked and the exam's absolutely fine. But when you talk to candidates and you talk to people whose trainees have been doing the exams, they're the same as well. Well, yeah, the exam's fine, but the candidate experience, it's really stressful. It doesn't reflect what they need to be able to do in practice. There seems to be a mismatch between what the reports the SRA publish are saying and what candidates, past and present.
Yeah, a real disconnection there.
Yeah, and that hasn't changed over the years.
Okay, maybe we can come on to the SQ in due course. What are the key pressure points then facing the SRA at the moment? Obviously, we've talked about the reputational issues, but there are all sorts of aspects, aren't there, that are difficult. Its relationship with the tribunal, the number of complaints it's fielding. She's got quite a lot on her plate, hasn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Moni makes a great point about the disconnect. I was really struck by when I spoke to Sarah Rapson a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her if anything had surprised her about, the sort of the situation that she faced. And she said that the biggest surprise was the sort of strength of feeling, and let's be honest, animosity from the profession. And I thought that was really interesting, not just because of the fact that you have a profession that seems to dislike its regulator, but the fact that she didn't seem to be aware that was such an issue. She couldn't be expected to be aware of the disconnect, but equally, was no one telling her when she arrived? No one say on day one, we have a huge reputational issue here. And I think that's probably when you say what's on her plate. I think that is the key ingredient that she has to address, which is the fact that they have lost the ability to listen to what the profession and the public have said. Once that is fixed, you can then start to address the many other issues. Not least, I think, is going to be a financial issue. I don't think it was a huge surprise that fees are going up. I think it's a huge surprise that the budget's going up by 29%. So fees are for individual solicitors going up by £100 a year, and for firms significantly more.
I think there's an old adage, isn't there? It's like politics. It's once you get elected into government, you get the pain over quickly. And she's early in her tenure. She's got a lot to do. This was possibly inevitable. In terms of the animosity, and I don't think that's too strong a word. It was interesting that she gave a presentation to the Law Society Council not long after joining, and that contrasted rather with her predecessor, Paul Philip, who was always pretty terse and standoffish with the Law Society Council. Reasonably enough in one respect, in that obviously there's a separation between representative body and regulator. But she did make it very clear that she had a turnaround job to do. And the attendees who were present that day made it fairly plain that they agreed.
And I don't think she would mind me saying that a couple of weeks after she started, she actually met with us and with other legal journalists in a sort of quite informal basis. A sort of, I want to meet you, I want to listen to what you've got to say, which was a marked change. And there's huge differences now in the communication from the SRA. So we're told about things in advance. We're given the heads up. This might not sound like huge issues, but actually it's really important for us to be able to go back to them and say, can we check what you've just told us? Can we make sure that this is the line that you want to get across? Communication is so important.
Speaking from the point of view of the Gazette, the fact that they're so much quicker to at least try and answer our questions, which are legitimate questions, I think we'd rather got used to. So, well, we better put a call into the SRA and expecting very little or nothing back, and that does seem to have changed. They do seem to be much more proactive, and that has to be good, I think.
I'll give you a small insight into how fraught it became. So we had a press conference soon after the Axiom Ints report came out, and there were lots of calls for resignations, and there was a lot of acrimony, and the profession was really upset. And we had a press conference, and the first question was, "Are you going to apologise
to the chief executive?"
Yeah, the first question to Paul Philip, the chief executive, was, "Are you going to apologise?" And his words were, "What for?" And I just thought that was such a remarkable response. I mean, you know what for? There's been a report.
Je ne regrette rien. Yeah, I mean that caused a lot of problems.
It was deliberately sort of
almost provocative.
Yeah, adversarial. And that was just so unnecessary. And it was perfectly clear what we were suggesting he should apologise for. And I think one of the really good things you can say about Sarah Rapson is that there's absolutely no way that she would answer that question in the same way. She's much more savvy, much more approachable, and much more willing to listen to the profession.
You need to remove that kind of, which you see in this isn't unique to the SRA or anything, but it's that kind of culture of defensiveness. If someone
Yes.
criticizes you, it's completely natural to get defensive, but equally just, take a moment back. See what's in front of you. There will be things that are beyond their control, but if there are things that they could have done better, and this applies to anyone, if there's something you could have done better, it's not a bad thing to put your hands up to go, yes, we could have done better, we should have done better. Explain why things, didn't go according to plan, or things didn't happen to how people might have wanted them to happen. But just remove the defensiveness, because that just rubs everyone up the wrong
Exactly.
way.
When defensiveness comes across as arrogance, which that did, and it just surprised me hugely. It surprised everyone, I think, because you would imagine that they've got a large PR and public affairs team. You'd imagine that the leadership would have been briefed that this ain't good. People are going to be listening very closely to what you've got to say, and just to be so defiant, lacking contrition to such a degree, it really jarred, I think, with everyone.
And it continues to. Moni makes a great point about the squee. If lots of people tell you this isn't working for us, or this is not achieving the outcomes you said it would, to turn around and say, well, we don't agree, misses the point completely. You have to take on board what people are saying and try and improve it. It's a basic way of running an organization.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, as we've said, Sarah Rapson certainly seems to be more adept at that. So let's just look then at what she's done in her early months, in addition to what we might call a charm offensive, although that's probably an exaggeration. She's very conscious of the necessary differentiation between a representative body like the Law Society and a regulator. I'll start off with one thing. The SRA seems to have dropped its imperial ambitions. We'll hear no more talk of taking over the regulation of legal executives, for example, which was mooted as 3 or 4 years ago now and has been rumbling along, but now seems to have been abandoned. At one point, the outgoing chair, Anna Bradley, was enthusiastic about the SRA morphing into the single regulator for all lawyers. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No, certainly not. And I think after the Mazur debacle last year, I think it's best that every regulator just takes a bucket and spade home and thinks about what they've done, really. Rather than trying to empire build. I don't think this is the time. You make the point. Essentially, what she's changed is the priorities. And the priorities have changed from, I think I said earlier that the SRA had become warped in its priorities, and I think she's had to reset exactly what the SRA is there for. It's to protect the public, is to safeguard public money and ensure confidence in the legal profession. Those are the fundamentals, really. And I think that over the years, and there's a lot of good reasons for this, which we'll come on to, the context, but I think they completely lost sight of what was important. And there were spot fines for, lack of transparency and firms not putting the price of a will on their website and things like that. All the time, millions of pounds were disappearing from client accounts of various firms. And I think this drive to transparency, which was superficial, I think, on a level, and also the SRA determined to promote comparison tools and try to make itself into some kind of Martin Lewis, when that just wasn't necessary. And there are limited resources, and they were spending money on things that were beyond their remit.
I think it's mission creep. Yeah, mission creep, wasn't it? That they seem to be sort of principally concerned with expanding their remit in every possible area, rather than sort of attending to the day-to-day job.
I think it wasn't one of the things they did. Didn't they do diversity-related work in terms of work on diversity in the profession, which to me doesn't feel like a job of a regulator to do. It might be something for the Law Society,
the Law Society
to do.
is a representative body.
The regulator should be regulating, access to justice and research and diversity of the profession. When you've got, given how many people you're looking after, and and your job is to regulate all those people effectively, it's, there are other organisations who can do things like looking at the diversity of the profession. You don't need to worry about that.
And empire building is the right word. There was a really crucial month, August 2023, which is probably as important a month as the SRA's had, I would say. It was very clear from the start of that month that Axiom Inc. was in all sorts of trouble, and there was we have to be careful what we say, but there was money missing, and millions continued to go missing during that month. And that was the same month that the SRA wrote to the government asking for increased fining powers, and responded to the government when there was a Daily Mail sting, and there were accusations of wrongdoing against solicitors, all of which were later they were cleared. Each of those solicitors was cleared. And so, while the SRA was determined to try to increase its fining powers and, bow down to government and public pressure, it was missing the fact that millions were going out the door at Axiom Inc. That's what I mean by priority.
I think you raise a really good point there about not maintaining an appropriate distance from government as well. There was that perception, you remember, some years ago where Lee Day was in its sights, and there was talk of far too close a relationship between the SRA and the Ministry of Defence sharing information. Ostensibly, legal regulation is independent of government. It certainly didn't look like it at that stage. And that impression is not helped by jumping to attention when the Daily Mail has a splash, ministers jump on it, and 12 hours later you announce an investigation. However many hours it was, perhaps a degree of reflection would have been appropriate before embarking on that, because it didn't come out of that looking good at all, did it? And again, that problem has sort of continued in one respect in terms of strategic litigation against public participation. It's jumped in and tried to do what the government wants in terms of curbing alleged slaps, and got nowhere, frankly, at the tribunal. Probably because, in my view anyway, that there's no definition of what a slap actually is. But also, again, was it wise to take on those cases? I'm not in a position to say, but they're certainly very costly for the profession and very reputationally damaging when they don't lead to any sanction or result that's in anybody's interest. So that's another thing that she's really got to sort out. We do need to be fair to the regulator. There was a wider political context to what was going on and what was expected of Paul Philip as chief executive and Anna Bradley as chair. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to understand that when we talk about mission creep and empire building, a lot of this was foisted on the SRA. So there were just 3 consecutive years where there was the report by the Competition and Markets Authority in 2016, where it said, solicitors and firms are not being open enough with their prices and their quality. Well, the SRA has to respond to it. They can't ignore that.
Yes.
2017 money laundering regulations were upgraded, if you like. And I remember being at the compliance conference the next year and Paul Philip saying to solicitors, listen, we're going to have to crack down on this. And they did. And I don't think firms listened to that message. And when firms talk about how unfair it is that they were fined for AML breaches, well, you were told. And the SRA tried to say. And then I think there's been a sense that maybe the SRA peeks around the curtains a little bit and started to involve itself in people's private lives and perhaps issues that were relevant to employment tribunals or should have been internally dealt with by firms.
Which is quite a controversial thing to say, really, because obviously there's some of the things that go on in a working environment could be said to reflect on solicitors' fitness to practice.
And it's really difficult. You know, 2018, the Me Too movement, the SRA can't just ignore the fact that there was a huge increase in reports of sexual misconduct by solicitors.
Big increase, yeah.
If it, you know, let's be fair, if it did ignore that and didn't bring any prosecutions, people like us probably would have been on his back and asked why. So, and you know, there clearly were issues in law firms that were exposed around that time and are still being exposed in terms of abuse of power and authority. And I think the SRA was right to involve itself in elements of that, but perhaps again overreached when it just didn't have the resources available. But I think it is fair to say there was a lot of pressures, a lot of external bodies, government, social movements that impacted on the SRA and made its life really, really hard and stretched resources to a point where it definitely lost its way.
Moni, what's your take on the role of the SRA as what we might describe as arbiter of behaviour undertaken in private life? Do you think that that's something that they should reconsider being a watchdog in terms of, or do they have to continue doing that because that's the modern world? What you do in your private life reflects on your ability to practice and your reputation as a professional.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because, I mean, personal and professional, yes, they're separate. But, you know, if, for instance, if someone said something horrific in a personal capacity, is that someone you'd want to go to in a professional capacity? So I think they can't take themselves away from things that happen in personal circumstances. I guess it's just not jumping in, but saying, okay, will the public have confidence in this person? Could it affect their confidence in the legal profession? And you have to almost take your time, really take your time answering those questions. And if you genuinely think, yes, this, to give like a hypothetical example, if a solicitor was found to have said something racist, which has come out, it's not going to knock the public's confidence in the whole profession. But I guess it would be good to get your thoughts. Is there a role for the SRA to step in? I would say
there has to
yes,
be in that case. Yeah.
Even though it wasn't said in a professional capacity, but confidence in the profession is affected. But it's about taking the time to go, right, how should we respond to this? What are the options? There are HR departments. How has the firm responded to this?
Yeah.
Is their response to it, has it been handled in a way that we actually don't need to come in
It's
now?
true. I mean, firms don't always cover themselves in glory, do they, in the way that they handle these issues, as we know.
But in terms of, for instance, does it warrant a referral to the tribunal, or can it be resolved before taking it before that stage? So, yeah.
And if it went to an employment tribunal, it's very easy to criticise the SRA for peeking behind the curtains. But if an issue went to the employment tribunal and it was found that a solicitor or a senior member of a law firm was committing sexual misconduct of some sort, that is clearly bringing the profession into disrepute and lowering the reputation of the profession, and that's one of the key principles that the SRA works by. So, how could they not step in at that point? I do think it's a really difficult one for them to weigh up.
It's particularly difficult, isn't it, given the current environment where we're seeing they're being bombarded by more and more alleged misconduct complaints now, partly, as Sarah Rapson has herself said, because they're easier to file with artificial intelligence, they're easier to articulate. So there is this question that she's alluded to of exactly what does the SRA choose to investigate and follow up on, and how do we change the way that we triage cases so that the cost of regulating solicitors just doesn't become essentially infinite. Now, that's not a problem faced just by the SRA. I mean, the FCA as well, the city regulator, has got exactly the same issue. How do we raise the bar without appearing to drop the ball, to mix two awful metaphors?
And it's worth saying as well, you mentioned the FCA. It is worth saying that the SRA is objectively underfunded. This is not something the profession would want to hear.
Doesn't want to hear, no. I agree.
And I think probably there is an issue with the fact that the profession has to pay all of it for the SRA. But, the SRA, even with its 29% increase, its budget goes to £111 million. The FCA budget is £783 million.
Yeah, we got 200,000 solicitors.
Yeah, and the SRA is supposed to prevent money laundering. The SRA is supposed to...
Well, the FCA will be taking that over, but that may involve incurring an extra charge for solicitors. We don't yet know, do we? But perhaps that'd even help the SRA. That's one large area of responsibility.
If I was Sarah Rapson, I'd be more than willing to pass the parcel on that one and say, you can unwrap it because we're done. Thanks very much.
And I think the context is critical because obviously the SRA was brought in under the 2007 Act, Legal Services Act. And the remit was pretty clear. This is the legal profession's big bang. We're exposing the law to the chill wind of the market in a way that really isn't replicated anywhere else in the world. And if you do that, if you say private equity in you come, if you say, oh yeah, you can go and list on the stock market, then that's going to require extra superintendents in a big way. And I don't think that's. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm not making a point about that being a good thing necessarily. People will have their own view on that. But if you liberalize a profession in that way, then regulation will have to be ramped up accordingly, and that will cost more. So, I mean, I don't think the profession pays too much, even under the new settlement recently announced to be regulated.
One thing I do think big firms, it's ludicrous that big firms pay the same to the compensation fund as all other firms. That has to change. You can't possibly ask, a high street firm from a small town to pay the same as a Clifford Chance. To fund the compensation fund. It's such a anachronism that it doesn't make any sense.
It feels like it, doesn't it? When I guess it's a legacy of the fact, as the Law Society says, we are all one profession. But I think there's a big question mark over that in that key respect. There's an enormous polarity of businesses in the law.
Yeah, and both things can be right. I mean, it is one profession, one set of standards and ethics and safeguards, but it's quite clearly there is disparity, and I think the fees and the compensation fund contributions should reflect that.
Okay, thanks very much. We've covered an awful lot in a fairly brief period of time, and this is a subject that we will come back later to on this podcast, the SRA and all its works. So let's just conclude today by a little assessment of what are the biggest folders looming in Sarah Rapson's inbox. What are the big things she's got to sort out most quickly? One occurs to me, that's the client account. We've been down this road before with the client account. That's where a lot of money goes missing. It's been said solicitors shouldn't have client accounts. However, finding an alternative has never been easy. But we seem to be back here again, John.
We are, yes, and I suspect it's only the lack of an alternative that is preventing the SRA from taking a really decisive step here. It is a really enticing idea, isn't it? That the fact that with PM Law and Axiom Ints, cumulatively £100 million of client money has gone missing. If you could flick a switch and protect that client account, why wouldn't you? This is not something the profession wants to hear, but this is the thinking of the SRA right now. That's not to say there's an easy answer, because there's not. And that's not to say that there is a natural successor in terms of a third party that would be able to look after the client.
Well, the argument is
account.
made, isn't it? You're simply shifting the risk of malfeasance to another party.
You are shifting the risk, but the argument within the SRA, which I don't think is settled, is that the risk is now too high on the solicitor side. So you are shifting the risk, but unfortunately, the naughty kids have caused a problem for the rest of the class, and essentially they cannot afford for any more of these kind of collapses to happen. As with the best will in the world, it would be nice if the SRA could stop them all, but it can't. And so the next one that comes up, how much money is going to go missing, and how much is the profession going to end up having to pay for that? And there will come a point where I think the profession looks at it and goes, "Hold on, is this worth it? Is it worth us holding on to this money when we're having to pay so much to cover the people who lose it?" And I think that conversation is definitely happening in the SRA, and I think it should be happening in the profession.
Well, it's a complex one, isn't it? Because, of course, as we know, law firms earn interest on the client account, which the government wants to take to fund access to justice. So that's another complicating factor. It'll be interesting to see what proposals they come up with, because the cost of a third-party provider won't be insignificant either. Does it really want to add to the costs of legal business, which it will?
And we've only the first thing that the SRA seems to have done is to say, well, you're going to have to send us accountants reports. I mean, my goodness, it's about time. Really.
Hot off the presses, isn't it? Yeah.
You will need extra expertise in the SRA to know what you're looking for in those accountants reports. But that really harks back to when we talked about priorities. In 2014, they wanted to do away with sending accountants reports at all. And eventually it was changed so that only qualified reports would have to be sent in. The SRA, when we talk about priorities, this is now the priority.
I think so, yeah.
Which is to make sure that firms are solvent and they are protecting client money. So that maybe 10, 12 years ago, this idea of a liberalized market where, we can just let them run free.
And it was aggressively free market then.
Yeah,
that was the ethos.
That's gone.
I would say it has. Moni, returning to the SQE, they call it the super exam, or did at the outset anyway. How super is it?
Well, I mean, I'm sure the exam is super. It's the candidates' experience of it and their confidence, how they're left feeling, which is the issue. I was looking at their draft business plan, and one of their big priorities is to enhance confidence in the SQE, which I think is a good priority because confidence is the issue. The exam itself, it's got to be tough. It
has to be difficult, doesn't it?
They do a lot of work to make sure it's fair and robust, but it's the confidence from the candidates, how their experiences that they need to look at. And I mean, just in terms of priorities, what's really handy for Sarah Rapson is the publication of a survey that was conducted by the National Junior Lawyers Division, which basically gives them the answers on how they can improve confidence. In that survey, 8 in 10 people didn't think the SQE was fit for purpose. Now, that's based on all sorts of factors. But one of the things, and they didn't think it was good value for money. One of the things that the SRA could do is, for instance, there's a cap on how many times you can sit the SQE. Just lift that, because it's not free resits. Candidates have to pay for it. So I think you can attempt to take it 3 times. But for someone who's taking it first time round, if you've only got 3 chances, that's a pressure on you that you don't need, which they can get rid of by just removing that cap. If you're on number 2 or number 3, it's a stressful exam already. Why make it even more stressful than it needs to be, having a candidate sit and think, God, if I fail this, that's it. And the mental toll it will take on them, knowing that, exhausted or nearly exhausted all their chances. So that's one thing they can immediately do. But it's a good priority to have, enhancing confidence. And they've got a lot of material already that they can look at in terms of how they can do that. And they might not solve everything in the next 12 months, but they can make a really good start. And it will be nice to see this time next year, when the next lot of SQE reports come out, just the quotes sounding a bit different, not just a case of, our exams are robust and we've had it checked.
Wouldn't it be a nice idea if there was a sort of oversight board for the SQE and there were people who have done the exam in the last 2 years on that board? Just little things like that in terms of listening to the people who've taken it would be a small step, but it would make such a difference in terms of accountability and people feeling like they're being heard. Like you say, 8 out of 10 people who are dissatisfied with it. Well, that proportion is too high. The SRA should be addressing that.
And, the SRA might look at it and go, they might have answers. Someone might say, well, I didn't like this. And they might say, well, it needs to be like this. Or I'm sorry that it's like that for you, but we can't do anything about that because of this, that, or another. But, the resits is something which I personally can't see why you need to have a cap on.
So I think it also feeds into that question of one object of the SQE was to increase the diversity of the people who came into the profession. But it's a massively unlevel playing field because, the people who are most likely to pass are people who can afford the preparatory courses or having the preparatory courses paid for, which, shock horror, tends to be sort of white middle class people. That's a gross oversimplification, but, there's a heck of a big grain of truth in there. So that would seem to be counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, you still
to
have
me.
to spend, thousands of pounds to give yourself the best chance of passing, unless you're, a solicitor apprentice, because they've got really good pass rates. But if the purpose of the SQE was to open up the profession, but only the people who can afford to or can get hold of thousands of pounds to sit the exam have the best chance, it doesn't feel like it's changed things for the better. It's just the same system, but just looks slightly different.
It would be good to see some concrete proposals, wouldn't it, for how this can be improved, how these issues can be addressed.
And if you need to go to a training provider, publish, the pass rates for each of the training providers, because the fees, I think, vary. So if someone's charging lots, but they don't have a necessarily high pass rate, you might think, well, I don't want to spend that much.
Presumably the cap exists, and this is not a slight on anyone who has not passed it 3 times, but presumably it exists as a sort of filter, a quality filter to make sure that only the brightest and the best get through. But equally, like particularly SQE 1 with multiple choice bears so little relation to the working life of a solicitor. It really, I don't see how the exam itself really ensures quality gets through, and the cap similar. You don't need a cap. I mean, you don't have a cap on driving tests. You can keep.
Seems anomalous. I suppose it depends how you look at it. Do you want a surgeon who qualified 4th time to take your leg off?
Well, if the life of a surgeon is completely different to what that exam was, I wouldn't care if it took 4 times, really. I mean,
if they passed in the end and it's still a difficult exam, then they've proved their competence.
Yeah.
And if it turns out there was a reason why it took them 7 times to pass, if they do make a mistake down the line, that's where the regulator can come in and go, you did that wrong. And, there's a process. But it just feels like there's little pressures that can be removed with little gestures. And we've commissioned research on this, that, and another. I can go and conduct my own research, just going out and speaking to
Law Society
10...
do that, and then you could act on the findings, possibly. I don't know. I guess we'd better wrap it up there. We've covered an awful lot in a relatively short period of time. We will come back to the SRA, and maybe we'll do Sarah Rapson at 9 months and a year, and see how she's getting on. So I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we will be back fortnightly with some hopefully provocative and interesting subjects in the future. John, Moni, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.